Here's some of the traversal stuff. I try to capture this as much as I could. This just never gets old. It's the same spirit jump as you would from Torrent, but while on foot, and it still feels great.
So we have no Torrent, no horses this time around.
But you don't need them.
Yeah, don't need them.
What is up, Nightfarers and Souls fans, and welcome to Game Gems, the show where we go hands-on with normally the latest, cool, small, hidden gem video games, but today we're doing things a bit different. We're checking out Elden Ring Nightreign, the multiplayer action game from Fromsoftware. I am Christian Macias, and joining me once again, video production manager Sam Allahan. Sam, are you ready to explore the lands of Limveld?
I'm ready to jump back in for many more hours of pain.
Dude, you have... Actually, we're going to get into that. I've got thoughts on that. If you're used to the pain of something like Shadow of the Erdtree, I think you might be pleasantly surprised with how approachable Nightreign has been so far. We're going to just start here. This is where like most runs will start. We're at the kind of hub area. There's lots of cool things you can do here. One of which, I didn't get sustained capture of this, but there's a whole training ground where you can practice every single weapon available in Elden Ring, which is great. You can equip anything and level up to any level and try some things out. But here are the things you can do before we get into a run. One of which is check out these relics here. When you play the game, after you complete a run, whether you fail or succeed, you'll encounter these relics. And what these will do is give your character some sort of perk. And the twist is, well, these are color coordinated and your character has these wells and you can only equip certain colors. I do mention your character because the game gives you a character to choose. You're not making it like you normally do in a Fromsoftware game. So you got a couple of options here. Got the Wilder, the Guardian, the Duchess, and gosh, I'm forgetting that witch's name there at the end. But every character has a passive and then two abilities: a character skill and an ultimate that you can use to help you succeed out in Limveld. Kind of talking a lot here, but trying to lay out the pitch of the game for us to kind of talk more casually once we get into a run, which we'll start looking at now. Sam, what do you know about Nightreign?
I have seen a lot more of it recently after everyone's had this kind of time with it, because I've not had the time with it myself, but I've started to see more of it, but I knew very little before that, and the bits I've started to see have really interested me, because it's a really interesting take on something like Elden Ring, like this Souls series, but from Software themselves. So I'm ready to learn a lot more about it.
Dude, so I put in about 10 hours over just the weekend, the network tests, and I would say that was because I'm trying to be like, good at my job to get like a well-balanced opinion, but like in actuality, I had a well-formed opinion about hour 2 or 3 by the end of the first session, and then the rest was all pleasure. Fromsoftware pleasantly surprised me. This is the one I was most skeptical about because, from the outside, it looks like Elden Ring meets Fortnite with the, shrinking circle. And I know that sometimes their online infrastructure can be kind of hit or miss depending, Elden Ring co-op was okay. It was fun, but, it didn't feel like it was meant to be played that way. So I was a bit worried how this would shake out. And dude, it feels like... I'm a big roguelite guy. This feels like if Elden Ring were designed to be a roguelite from the ground up, with a movement system that feels more akin to like a Sekiro, and even combat that reminds me a bit of Sekiro as well. Like, just pleasantly surprised all around, and it feels so good, dude. I'm kind of bummed you didn't get to try it as well, because I think you would get a good kick out of it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to actually play it when it comes out. It's it's interesting because I know with Fromsoftware that Elden Ring was their first real dive into something open world, and I mean, safe to say they nailed it. And so now with them trying something new again, like very different from their usual structures and what they're known for, I kind of completely trust that they'll nail it again, to be honest. The biggest things I'm interested about now is how it actually plays in terms of like the movement and everything, because I know there's a lot of little differences in what we see from this with the jumping and the climbing.
Right.
Obviously, Elden Ring and Sekiro introduced jumping into the actual games, but this expands it more. How does it feel in terms of when you're playing it compared to what we're used to?
I'm glad you brought that up. This capture is from the very last test session over the weekend. They opened up multiplayer passwords. So my buddy and I paired up with a random, and we're playing together. And movement is very much, I think, going to be congruent with the game's pace, which is insanely fast. You can see my base sprint speed is already really fast. I'm not taking fall damage. I'm mantling around. And that's because Nightreign operates on this closing circle system, right? Which means you only have so much time to get through a day. There are 3 days in the cycle of one run in Nightreign. And so you want to be going to the most POIs on the map to fight, field bosses in order to level up. You can see the top left there. I'm a level 3 currently as we're fighting this dragon. We want to be getting to the highest level we can before night falls and we fight the first boss of the first day. And that gameplay loop is what drives, I think, the pace, the quick pace of it, and why I think you would need just a faster movement-based system like within Elden Ring altogether, which does kind of change up the game feel, but I'm surprised like how good it fits, surprisingly, if that makes sense. This is why I made that Sekiro comparison, because it feels like something like that. It still kind of feels right at home for them.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Elden Ring and what started to introduce with like the Ashes of War and some of the more out there spells you could do, especially in Shadow of the Erdtree, perhaps some of it felt like it was then limited to what the soul structure was, and this is kind of them stepping aside and having the freedom to do it in a way that fits it a lot more.
Yes, I should also mention the game director of Nightreign is Junya Ishizaki, which I think he's got a couple of credits to his name already in Fromsoftware's history. Mostly, he was he was one of the game designers of Bloodborne, and then lead game designers on Dark Souls 3 and 1, and then was one of the battle directors on both Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree. So this is him stepping up into a bigger role with Nightreign. Again, that Fromsoftware DNA, that formula is very much here. Does not feel like it's doing a kind of Fortnite-y thing or a multiplayer thing. They're trying something within the Souls formula, and in my opinion, off to already extremely strong start. Maybe except for here, I got stuck behind a boss and I got kind of scared. But here's the interesting mechanic here. My buddy dies. He's fallen, right, and the way you have to revive him is by attacking his death bar, which can make things pretty hectic when you're in the middle of a boss fight. But that's part of the chaos here.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've seen recently after all this is that attacking to revive, and it's I think a really good way to do it in terms of keeping the flow of the combat going, but still making you have to like balance it and manage that difficulty.
Yeah, and across the couple of fights that I've been in, I've seen some like sorceress use like glintstone pebbles to attack my health bar. I've seen the Guardian. He's the that kind of tanky eagle-looking dude. I've seen him do one of his ultimate arts to smash down and res both me and my teammate at the same time. So there's numerous ways to do it, just using what's available to you, other than just a standard R1 or R2 attack.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting to see. I'm curious about what sort of, as you say, there's like preset characters, what sort of options there will be in the full release or potentially further on down the line.
That's going to be interesting as well, because they've announced they're doing, future content releases for this as well. And, I'm kind of hoping they get a little bit crazier with it. Like, we already know that previous Fromsoftware bosses are in the game. The Nameless King is supposed to be in Nightreign. You know, who's to say that maybe we don't get additional characters as well in Nightreign? Maybe we get the wolf from Sekiro, and we get more of like, you know, that if you played Shadow of the Erdtree and you picked up the bubble tier, no, what was the deflecting hard tier in your wondrous flask, your physic. You can kind of play Elden Ring as if it were a Sekiro game. It'd be pretty cool if you get something like that in here, which would completely, I mean, would quicken the combat even more. Here's some of the traversal stuff. I try to capture this as much as I could. This just never gets old. It's the same spirit jump as you would from Torrent, but while on foot, and it still feels great.
So we have no Torrent, no horses this time around.
But you don't need them.
Yeah. Don't need him.
This is something my friend and I were doing a lot, which is I would use my ultimate, which is that huge charge attack that would break posture, and then I would go in for a visceral attack, and then he would use he's playing as the Duchess, and you can hear that like rewind clock in the background a little bit. That rewinds time for the nearest enemy, the nearest most recent damage you've done to an enemy. So we get massive damage to bosses just by me doing a, you know, break poise, visceral, and then he will do it again.
Oh, that's, yeah, I like the sound of that. I really like them leaning into the abilities and spells and just a lot more wild stuff that potentially wouldn't have worked in typical Elden Ring.
That's the big thing I think about this game so far, just by playing just this one run over and over again. I'd be remiss to mention that there was only one expedition available during the network test, and as far as I'm aware, there were two variations of it's the same map, but there are two variations of the run, so you'd get different bosses depending on which variation you were loaded into. And I think a big thing for how well received Nightreign will be at the beginning is how well you mesh with the people you're paired up with. If you're not playing the game with friends, and it's not cross play as far as I'm aware, if you are pairing up with random people and you're not doing so well, you might be, you know, facing the similar frustrations that like a new player would feel launching up a Fromsoftware game they'd never played before, and, you know, not understand how the game works. I think that was maybe my one worry at the end of the test, is like, how well will this translate to new players? Because it sort of does assume you know how to play a Fromsoftware, literally just Elden Ring in general, right? It assumes you kind of know all these things. But at the same time, you know, there are new players to Fortnite all the time, and people learn how to play the game just by playing it. And there's, you know, there is a training ground in this, and there's, of course, you know, guides and videos that you can maybe run into on YouTube. So I think this maybe, although the learning curve is a little steep, it does feel maybe the most approachable, which is going to be super interesting come May.
Yeah, potentially a good stepping stone for people who don't know it into that kind of soul structure. In terms of, as you say, so if you're balancing it with new players who might not potentially know it as well, or haven't played Elden Ring, or aren't using sort of the best characters that mix together for abilities. When you die in the game, and you know you don't have that revival, it runs out, you're just out of the run.
Right.
And okay, so
oh, I'm sorry. In Nightreign, you're saying?
Yes, yeah.
No, you'll respawn at the closest site of grace, and you'll respawn with you'll lose one level. So if I'm level 11 right now, I'll fall down to level 10. So I will come back. The only time it's game over is when all three characters die during a like final boss attempt of that day cycle. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I think that's a really good thing, because a lot of roguelike kind of games have you know, that system of the whole concept is you die and try it again. But while that lends itself to Fromsoftware's structure quite a bit, I think it's good to kind of have those bits to keep it going. it still balances the difficulty. You know, there's still a risk to it, but it kind of just expands it a lot more, so you can play more often and potentially longer games more frequently.
Yeah. I'll talk about this at length a little bit here in a second, but I want to mention the Emergent gameplay in Nightreign is already extremely engrossing. We were in the middle of fighting a field boss, that dragon that you saw a minute ago, and then we were invaded by Margit, who is targeting my friend and is relentless. And the final that circle is closing in on us, behind us, and we're realizing we can't fight him up on this ledge anymore. So all three of us, me, my friend, and this random, got entirely separated, and we're trying to meet near this church over there, this green marker that I think I lied down, which will give us an extra use of our flask. So if we can pick that up on our way and then get inside the circle, we could then hopefully defeat Margit with an extra buff to our character. And that kind of stuff is happening pretty much all the time because, again, this game operates on this kind of ticking clock sort of system. And then I picked up this passive, which gives me the glint stones pretty much constantly. There's all kinds of buffs that you can get for characters, whether it's just like, a medallion or some kind of spell that will consistently just automatically use. You don't have to like equip it or anything. You just have it all the time.
Yeah, it's a good way to use all of the kind of familiar equipment and some new ones thrown in there as well. With the map and like the stuff you find, I know this one's the only the two variations of the expedition, but how different do the maps get between runs in terms of like placements and things you'll find?
Okay, so what I've noticed is, it's the same map, but the variations are the bosses that you'll fight and not necessarily the field bosses. The POI stayed the same, and I'm going to guess that's because it's the same expedition, technically. We're just in a slight variation of it. I know based on trailers we've seen some different locations altogether. I'm assuming that's where the variety will be with doing a different expedition, which, as far as I'm aware, the expedition is what final boss you'll fight at the end of day 3.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things I'm interested to see now with the full release is what kind of maps there are and what kind of variation you get with expeditions, because that's going to be, I think, a big part in keeping the interest and keeping something fresh, as opposed to just the bosses potentially.
There's kind of a balance there, right? Because Fromsoftware is known for their handcrafted areas. I mean, it's kind of staggering what they did with Elden Ring, right? And like that, all of that is handcrafted. Maybe we wouldn't want some procedural generation element in something like this, but at the same time, you're right though. It is a multiplayer game, and you're kind of expected to put in several hours, and if you're looking at the same things over and over again, will that get tiresome? That's a big question. Who knows?
Yeah, I think maybe I agree that procedural's not necessarily the way with it, because it's their shining point is what they make. So maybe just strong support with loads of maps and just keep adding them or rotating them and finding a way to keep it live, because I assume this is essentially going to be their sort of, if it's successful, sort of an Elden Ring live service kind of game,
right? Which I don't think I'd be kind of bummed if they did stuff like this, I suppose, on the side in order to kind of supplement. We know they're doing a bunch of small games anyway. They've announced that they're working on a couple of projects. But if we're getting more stuff like this on the side to kind of satiate that sort of that Fromsoftware itch, I think I'm all for it, because I think all their games play well, even if there's some jank and some kind of issues. Like on the network test, there's a couple of runs where we got disconnected during a run, which is unfortunate, but that's the point of doing these tests, is to do stuff like that. But even with all that, I was surprised at how great of a time I was having just by being back in the loop of playing a From Software game again, even if it's technically sort of the same game, if you will. If that makes sense.
I think, that's it. We know they're very, very talented developers at this point, and they've made a lot of the biggest games in the last few years, a lot of, Game of the Year nominees, Game of the Year winners. So to see more from them, and if it reaches that same quality, I don't think it's it's going to be hard to complain about that.
So for any viewer potentially watching, if you do not want to see what the final boss looks like of the network test or of this expedition, I would highly encourage you to click off now. I'll give you a couple of seconds here to click off. Otherwise, if you've already seen it, or just curious, here's what that looks like. And man, if you were praising From Software for their art direction in Shadow of the Erdtree, you're going to be pleasantly surprised with what this next area looks like. You do get a final grace here to level up your character as much as you can with the runes you've accumulated. And then there's a shop here, so you can prep before the final battle, as well as, what would you call that? There's a place to strengthen any armament that you have if you've acquired any smithing stones. And there are shops around the map as well. I forgot to mention that you can find vendors for shops and you can strengthen armaments. There's Everjails, but look at this, man. Look at that view.
Yeah, that's exactly what we love.
A little cutscene here as well. I'll be quiet here. Even in their supposed throwaway multiplayer games, pageantry does not evade From Software. We're about to fight the final boss of the network test. This is the first time I've ever seen the boss. This is like in this capture you're seeing. This is the first time I've faced him ever, and I only fought him 3 times. So we'll see if I succeed or not, Sam.
Oh, this is sort of a Cerberus Ninetales kind of looking. Yeah,
exactly, dude. That's exactly what I thought of. Yeah, nine-tailed fox with a sword.
Scenery is great. From Software love their big, long distances with pillars in the background, and now we've got swords.
I was, as I was going into this fight, my friend had already faced him once, and he said, my advice for you is just to be patient. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. Because, when I'm patient in a solo boss battle with, a normal From Software game, I don't always get them on first try. Part of that gameplay loop in a From Software game is learning attack patterns. And I was curious to see how it would feel with 3 people, because we got pretty leveled up pretty quickly, so we were kind of steamrolling through a lot of the other bosses that we were finding out in Limveld. So I thought, like, okay, are we going to steamroll through the final boss then, since we're so kind of overpowered? And no, the boss definitely had hands. So it was all 3 of us kind of tagging in and out of fighting this thing, Gladius, the Beast of Night, and it felt just as cathartic as a solo run would have.
Yeah, it's strange as well, because in Elden Ring or any of the Dark Souls games, anything like that, if you're playing even with other players and you're attempting a tough boss, one of the biggest things in those games is the boss runs. In this game, the boss is being just as theatrical, just as dramatic, just as difficult, but the boss run is the whole game, essentially.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the risk is big.
That AoE right there can sometimes be an end killer. I was lucky enough to dodge it on my first ever attempt, but I'll let you know, Sam, on subsequent attempts to this boss, a lot of us were going down right there for that
man.
AoE.
Just splitting into 3 as well, just to make it.
Yeah. So ideally, you would have, because there's 3 players, you would have one Gladius, I suppose, per player kind of chasing after you, but because AI does whatever it wants, normally it was 2 or 3 going after one person and one person running away while the other tries to get the aggro from that player to save them. Doesn't always go as planned, but I mean that's part of the allure, man.
That's the chaos we need in this, to be honest.
We're getting to the end here, Sam. Final thoughts on Elden Ring Nightreign.
I am very excited to play it. As someone who's played all of the, FromSoft games, this looks like a really big step into something new. And like you say, as a supplementary thing, but I am all for it, and I think it's gonna cause a lot of pain and tears and also joy.
Absolutely. Patiently anticipating May 30th. Nightreign available on PS5, PS4, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, and PC. That was Nightreign, and that is this week's Game Gems. Let us know what you think of Elden Ring Nightreign down below. For all things action RPG, make sure you stick with the gamer.